welcome to the Discipleship for the Decades podcast here at Bethel Presbyterian Church. I am Jeremy.
I'm Karis.
We're coming to you from a wet and rainy Cornelius, North Carolina. For those who listen, we have some folks around the world that listen, so that's a really cool thing. But we are here in the Lake Norman area, just north of Charlotte. And yes, it is pouring down rain on and off today. So hopefully it's a little bit better where you are when you're listening. But we've been in the sermon series called Let's Get Moving. It's been a great kind of testament to us wanting to move forward despite some of what's going on here at Bethel and just in the culture. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we've seen folks move around here at Bethel. And we often talk on this podcast, at least, about how small steps of movement or small steps towards discipleship can often have big impacts. It doesn't always have to be big, gigantic steps. And you had some scripture that kind of came to mind that kind of tied that aspect of the podcast into today's discussion.
Well, and I think, you had alluded to things that Bethel's going through of why would we step into a sermon series called Let's Get Moving. And for those who know what's going on here at Bethel, we had some leadership transitions. We had some unexpected changes of a pastor who stepped down. And so I think it's easy for churches to get paralyzed when we feel like, oh, who's at the helm? How are we going to move forward?
Yep.
And it was really cool to see how leadership came together and said collectively, hey, this is not a time to sit on our hands. Let's keep moving. And so that little backstory there. And so I would say there's a bit of rebuilding that's going on here as we continue to think about next steps and forward motion. So this came to mind from the book of Zechariah, which I know is immediately you go right to Zechariah.
Yes.
Should you think about these things?
I can quote this verbatim.
Two things I think about God's movement as it comes from this text. One is from Zechariah 4:5, and he's talking to the prophet. And this is a messenger of God saying, this is God's message to Zerubbabel. You can't force these things. They only come about through my spirit, says the God of angel armies. So I think that was one piece of the movement as we've been talking about Let's Get Moving. There's a sense that it feels weighty on us, but so much of the weight is on God's spirit and how God's spirit in us moves us to follow obediently. God's spirit does things in the world that we go, oh, look at that. How do I join into what God's already doing?
Yep.
So I love that part about...
You mean you can't force the Spirit? You can't force God's will?
No.
What?
No, God. And the other one, Zechariah 4:10, that the word continues on, and this is in respect to Zerubbabel rebuilding the temple. So as many of you church biblical scholars know, the temple was rebuilt, and this is the word. It says, that will be your confirmation that the God of angel armies sent me to you. Does anyone dare despise this day of small beginnings? They'll change their tune when they see Zerubbabel setting the last stone in place. So this idea of this temple that's taken a while, right? Brick by brick. It's going to have a different look to it than the temple before it. But that phrase, does anyone dare despise the day of small beginnings? And I think that's a beautiful word to our church, to anybody who's on the faith journey, that we often think of movement as big movement. And sometimes those small faithful steps are exactly what that's the movement God's orchestrating in you. And so, or in me, or in anybody. And so loving that idea of don't despise those small steps. Doesn't have to be a massive mountain moving shift. God is capable and will at times work in that way.
Yeah.
But so much more is those small movements of, I responded in patience. I was kind in this moment. That the fruit of the Spirit is showing up in how we live in small ways too.
So it isn't always, moving cross country to take on a new job.
Right.
Yeah, no. Well, and it's interesting to me because when I think to some of the examples that we have here at Bethel, something that sticks out to me is the fact that the movement could be the same for each person, what they're actually doing, but one could be very small to somebody where that movement could be huge to another. Like our new covenant partner class, we had how many folks join
Had
just recently?
10 new covenant partners join.
Yeah, and so some of them, it was very obvious that they were going to join. That's what you do. That's a small step for them, right? Where others, right, we've got one that was a giant
Yeah, I
leap.
think anybody who feels like it's normative to become a member in a church when they move to a new place, and some who were not raised in the church feel like it's a big deal to say, hey, even though I'm not entirely sure about everything I believe or what this whole church thing is about, I'm taking that step of faith to say, there's something here that I want to be a part of. And how cool that you can have both in the same group of people. You're right.
Yeah, and that, when we talk about the weight of some movement, that weight then falls back on the church to go, it doesn't matter, right, where you're coming to us from, whether it's small or big, we're going to come and kind of put our arms around you and we're going to say, hey, we'll walk right step in step with you while you're walking step in step with Christ and see what that looks like. I think to another really cool way that we've seen a 10-year-old in our congregation, Abigail, who
faithful saint, yes.
Yes, right. She's sung with our praise team. She's done a lot. But in this instance, our serve spotlight for the month was Watchmen of the Streets, and she decided that she wanted to collect items to donate for Watchmen. And so she had her Abigail's 3B fundraiser, and I think we finally remembered exactly what she collected. Blankets?
Batteries.
No.
No batteries. Blankets,
Band-Aids.
Band-Aids, and
bug spray.
Bug spray. Right.
So she set up a table, posted on Nextdoor in her neighborhood, in the Facebook group, and said, hey, I'm collecting these things for Watchmen. If you come and donate, I'll give you free lemonade, and I'll give you a free handmade bookmark that she did. And so I got to go out there and see this little setup, and there were folks that were stopping by, and it was such a cool way for even a 10-year-old. And, we can give a little bit of praise to Jenny and Woody as well, right?
Yeah,
because they were all
absolutely.
behind it. They were setting the tables up. They were really helping her get this operation up and running. So what a cool way to serve tangibly, right? One of our mission partners here.
Yeah.
But a great way for her to express her faith in Jesus through something
Absolutely.
so cool like that.
And at every age, I like to tell my kids, hey, kids they can have big voices in the church too. They can be a big part in this idea of us relegating kids to the corner when we can bring all ages in and say, you have a voice here, you have a role here, you can serve here.
Yep.
What a great example. So Abby, shout out to you. Way to go, girl.
Yes.
Really inspiring. And similar movement came from early on in the sermon series. Another covenant partner here who shall remain nameless, but there was a real push after, I think, the first or second sermon of, I feel moved to let's do something for Watchmen. Let's really not just say we're supporting, but let's go do something. And so there is a movement, and I know you'll be hearing about it, and I won't share too many of the details other than there's a group of folks going down to share food with Watchmen of the Streets, with the homeless neighbors there, bringing some music, bringing some food, possibly some shoes for folks. So just exciting to see when people feel compelled. I would say it's not one sermon that does that. It's the work of the Spirit in that person at that time, and this fun combination of okay, now we're going. So
yeah, that's two great ways, and just happens to be with that one same mission partner. Shout out to Heath and Watchmen. They've got another event tomorrow night as well. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening there. Another one that comes to mind, I just had lunch with a friend of ours, Dixon. Most of you guys know Dixon. And again, some of this stuff is coming up, so we're not going to share too much. But Dixon graduated seminary, so we were able to celebrate him, at least recognize him during the service not too long ago.
He is a fellow Fuller alumni, so just thumbs up for the mutual Fuller seminary student.
So he's
shameless
got
plug.
Yeah, right. He's got his degree in, I want to say, global leadership studies. Sounds right. But he finished that. He feels like he's being called by God to continue on his school before he goes back home, and so he got admitted into 3 prestigious We're going to let him tell that story, I think, coming up this week, but three very prestigious universities. And is possibly going to be going to one this fall. And so that's a really, really cool way. If you've followed Dixon since day one here at Bethel and the way that God brought him to us and the way that folks wrapped their arms around him, we've been moving through Dixon for a long time.
With him.
Yes, with him. Yeah. And it's been such a really great kind of way to see him flourish in what God's doing in his life. And I think where the trajectory is that God's got him going is going to be really cool to see what he can do when he can kind of get back home and start making a big impact there in Uganda. So,
and Jeremy and I, we came up with a list of stuff, and the fun thing is realizing that we are just two people at Bethel, and there's so many more stories, but some other ways that I've seen movement, I feel like I've seen movements of hospitality. One particular story of a couple in the choir who invited the entire choir to a birthday party. And I just saw that as this outpouring of a community, hospitality, just was such a sweet gesture to say, hey, we're including everybody in this, and we want that to be celebrated. So I think of that as God's movement of kindness and generosity. Some other ones that I can think of are movements. Literally, I think I told the congregation I was planning to prayer walk, and I've had two faithful prayer walkers who've been walking with me, and to see the movement of relationship with the three of us, the movement of where God's leading each of us, of the challenges that we feel like we're facing that we can share as we walk together. Literally, we are moving. How cool that's been to see two people who just said, hey, no, it didn't have to be 10 of us. It could have been. Yeah. But the faithfulness of this trio of three, cord of three strands, not easily broken, right? So just a real joy in that literal prayer movement. And to be able to pray as people who love this church while we're walking has been really profound for me, my own shaping.
Well, and this wasn't even on my list, but it comes to mind. We'd be remiss to talk about the ways that Bethel as a whole has moved since the start of COVID. That was a tough transition for a church like us that is all about fellowship, right? I mean, we are about being together here, and then to say, no, you can't be together, but we're still going to find ways to be together, even though we can't be physically together. And so from adding Zoom to Sunday school classes and meetings to allow folks to be able to attend regardless of where they're at.
To see the generations learn new technology, right?
Absolutely.
Movement of, okay, this is intimidating, but I'm going to go for it, right?
Yep. So now I think every Sunday school class that we have meeting has an in-person and a Zoom option. Right now, most of our meetings, most of them are either on or off, but like a session meeting, we can get people like Jeff Kittle in, which is a really great thing for him to be able to still be with us, even though he can't be physically here. But putting more emphasis on our worship services, the streaming, podcasting like this, the videos that Miss Jan did for the kids. We did Sunday Night Blaze on YouTube. Now
we'll never go back, right? There's things where we have moved into a new era and we've embraced new practices that we see life, or we see, hey, it's a busy season, so we can Zoom if this committee meeting needs to happen online because everybody's going crazy, and it's better to be at home with your family and just take 40 minutes to be online real quick. You don't have to drive half an hour. So there's things that I think we can embrace and say, this is better because we've started doing it this way, or this is a new approach that we never would have thought about. So that's brilliant. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, we probably have some more from you guys that will come to mind, but also felt like we should probably, if we're going to talk about ways other people have been moving, the least we could do is talk about ways that we've been moving as well. So I don't know if you've got yours, or I can go first. It doesn't matter to me.
Well, as many of you know, my backstory is that we moved from Idaho during COVID to come here, and there's been times where I go, what have I stepped into? But truthfully, to see how God's moved in me has challenged me as a leader, as a family member of a new Bethel family here, to be perhaps uncomfortable in certain things that I didn't feel comfortable with. I would say at session meetings, learning how to moderate well and being very authentic in moments when I don't moderate well. But what God's pushed me to, I think, is just to say, I'm going to teach you about yourself as a pastor, as a leader. What maybe have you not been able to have experience in, and now you're getting it. So I would say there's been some movement for my own life in, just the circumstances of life that you show up for, and you go, oh, okay, Lord, here's where we're going. Not by my movement, but by your movement, and look what you're doing, and how fruit can come from those unexpected twists and turns. Not always a bad thing.
So I'm going to ask this question. I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't mention this earlier. Is there a way in which you feel like, is there one area that you would be willing to go, I'm going to name that this is one way that God has shown me like something new in you that you didn't expect? Is there something that comes to mind on through that movement? This is something that's kind of bubbled up to the surface.
I think that I've always known there's a peacemaker side of me. There's a piece of me that, between two brothers, I was the middle sister. So perhaps this is a natural thing, but always understanding why nothing's wasted in God's economy, and feeling like there's been moments where I have gotten to be diplomatic in this role that have come naturally. And so that's something new that I'm learning about myself as a result of movement. Times where, just trying to say, okay, how do we represent all voices here? How do we bring two communities of worship together? We have a traditional and a worship cafe. How can we both understand that both are valid expressions of worship and celebrate each other rather than disparage? And I think that's true in so many churches. When you see two groups who have said, hey, how cool that this group is part of our family and this group is part of our family, and we're different, but can we celebrate the beauty of what's involved there? And I think of the congregational meeting just a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah,
and we had the choir singing and the praise team came down and sang on some of the choral anthem, and the choir sang along with the praise team, and things like that, where you go, okay, how beautiful is the body of Christ when it's united and living out its beautiful mission of let's serve each other, let's serve the body. So that made me smile. And I don't know that it's a direct result of my leadership in this place, but I think it was two groups being ready to be moved by the Spirit, right, at the right time, and come together in such a great way. So that was a blessing. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot.
Yeah, totally. How about you?
Yeah, I was thinking, we've been living this journey with most of you guys, but what came to mind was the IVF process and the excitement around getting pregnant, and learning, to me at least, and where I personally have come from, and would probably give you a different answer to this question, but I think God has shown me that my reliance on Him wasn't as much as it should have been in the first place, right? And there's been some times when I have literally been helpless through this process, and God is like, if you would just rely on me like you're called to, right, I'll take care of you. Jan mentioned that today in our staff meeting, just talking about, God's there, God's telling her the same thing, right? I've got this, whatever situation it is, in the palm of my hand. You just have to trust me and have the faith to know that I'm going to let my will work. And so that's kind of something that's been, it's a slow process, right? Again, it's not something giving control of the reins isn't necessarily natural for me. But it has been so refreshing when I have been at the point where I just go like, God, I literally can't do anything. And then the minute I acknowledge that in prayer, something amazing happens, right? And I found myself saying that in the hospital, for those that knew a little bit about that situation. And it's like, God, literally, I can't do anything. I'm waiting on an answer. And then I get a phone call several minutes later, positive news, which was great. And so God's sovereign and God's goodness will always run through my life. I just have to be willing to, but again, those are not easy lessons to have to learn.
Right. Reliance, utter reliance of, okay, open hands, right? And,
I'm definitely a closed fist kind of guy.
Yes.
It just is. It's my nature. But then you get to where you know that about yourself, or even I'm sure in your situation or a lot of your situations, whatever that movement's looking like, you realize areas where you need more of God, you need less of you. You find balances there, right? To say, okay, where do I feel like this is the Spirit moving and I'm being called to do this versus me wanting to do this personally and it not being of the Spirit.
Well, and I was thinking too of just, that encouragement for, okay, we see good movement, we celebrate it. And then when we move or when we regress, to not kick yourself too much, right? To say, you know what? I will have moments where I will be on the mountaintop and I will feel like, oh, I've got this. God did his thing and I got to be a part of it. And then you'll hit the valley the next day and you'll say, I was a jerk to this person and I don't know what happened, and to realize that the movement it's kind of like that back and forth of the tide, right? There are times where we feel like we've moved back a little bit and then, okay, we'll have this surge forward. But I guess the prayer and the faith is that as we are being shaped, what is it? Paul talks about by degrees.
Oh,
this is the passage I did not look up, but just that idea of from glory to glory, right? That there is the big movement that we can't even see because we're too close to it. But if we look back in the 10-year rearview mirror, maybe we go, oh yeah, I'm not in the same place anymore. And this slow following of God's Spirit, this movement towards him has shaped me. And now I'm in a different place. So,
well, and that's those... the seeds that we talk about planting but not getting to see the fruit of, because you may end up finding yourself, maybe you've moved on, maybe someone else has moved on, maybe a situation has come and gone. You may have planted a small seed in somebody or something that ends up being really great, very fruitful, but you just don't often see that. And it does sometimes take us 10 plus years, right, to look back and go, oh, wait, that's how God was at work, right? Like, You're right. You're so close to it, and you just pray that the Spirit's continually working in you. So, I don't know. It's just been super cool to kind of see the ways in which people around us have been moving, and the staff. There's a lot of movement in the staff as well. So it's just a lot of really cool stuff. The kind of shameless plug we have, though, is that this coming Sunday.
This Sunday, I was just going to move to that.
So we'll say the date of it just in case you go back and listen to this later. It'll be June the 27th. So don't come to us and ask about speaking if you listen to this later. But we're going to have an opportunity. You want to speak that opportunity in worship?
We've just asked that members of the Bethel family in worship, we're just going to leave some space. And often we carve out worship like, okay, awkward silences are bad. We can't leave any awkward silence in there, but we're going to give space to, is there a story of God's movement in your life that you have to share? And I hope that those who are listening right now, that you feel encouraged that you do not have to feel eloquent in what you're sharing. It could be 2 sentences. It could be 30 seconds, whatever it is, that it is so encouraging for the body of Christ to see how God has moved his people. And so if there's any kind of baby step of movement that you feel like, you know what, I'm being nudged to share this, I would say listen to that nudge and share it not to your glory, but to God's glory, because as we share those stories, how encouraging that is for the big body of Christ. So
and you might have a story that speaks to someone, kind of like what I mentioned this past week, right? Your story of movement might be the encouragement that somebody needs to write their own story of movement.
So we're going to just pass the mic for about, we'll see how long it goes. If we go a little overtime, you'll understand that it was a real hit. Yep. But we're going to open it up and see what God's Spirit does in worship this Sunday.
So that'll be a really cool opportunity. If you want to reach out to Karis and I, it is solely for the purpose, there was some confusion, I think, on Sunday. It's solely for the purpose of us kind of getting an understanding of the number of folks that we may have that want to share. Any story is welcome. I'm not sure that we want any additional sermons on top of what Tom Labonte is going to be preaching. But if God's got a story for you to share, we would definitely love for you to have it. So just take these kind of stories that we've talked about and the ways that God's been moving in Karis and I's life as an additional encouragement to maybe have you share your story on Sunday. So join us next time for our next episode of the Discipleship for the Decades podcast. As always, comment, reach out, let us know if anything strikes you. Put it in the YouTube comments or wherever you listen to your podcast. We would love to interact with you, or send us an email to the church, and we can go back and forth that way too.
And go check out Zechariah 4. Don't take my word for it. Check it out. It's good stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Bye, guys.